Start reading about the chapter 20, the WEC. We went to church as usual Sunday morning at Winfield Methodist Church, but I had a hard time keeping myself from yawning during the sermon. I'd stayed up the night before reading Magic Squares and Cubes, and it was even better than I'd expected. Before, I'd only seen Magic Squares with 3 or 4 rows and columns, but this book had squares with 5, 6, and even 7. It had a picture of an engraving by Albrecht Dürer that had a magic square in it too. And it even talked about how magic squares were used as talismans to protect you from harm. I closed my eyes to rest for a moment and thought about the book and Liz and talking. For a long time, I thought of myself as only speaking to 4 people: Judy, David, Daddy, and Mother, if she asked me a direct question. Then Liz came along and things started to change. I answered math questions in Mr. Harding's class most days and squeezed out a few words to JT. I told Miss Taylor I was going to give the presentation and had given it and had a whole conversation with Betty Jean afterward. I'd even spoken to Pastor George. What was going on? Mother elbowed me in the ribs. I opened my eyes and she passed me the collection basket. I was supposed to put my $1 donation inside, but I was so distracted by magic squares and talking and presentations, I forgot and just passed the basket on to the next person. Drat. At least Mother hadn't noticed. I put in $2 next week to make up for it. After the service came Sunday school. My teacher, Miss Winthrop, was young, a college girl, I think. She'd only been at our church for a year or 2 and was sort of annoying and amusing at the same time. She was a little on the plump side and had dimples when she smiled, which is pretty much all the time. Miss Winthrop was a glass of seltzer that had been pumped full of too many bubbles. Even if you skinned your knee or something, she'd say, "Oh, darling, there's no need to cry," with a huge grin on her face as if she enjoyed seeing you bleed. "I've got a Band-Aid right here in my purse. Isn't that fabulous luck?" No. I didn't think it was lucky to have tripped on a rock. And she had the Band-Aids in her purse because it was her job to bring along the first aid kit on the youth group hike. That week in Sunday school, Miss Winthrop was talking about the Apostle Peter and how he thought you should be good, kind, and loving to everyone, even if it was hard. I was thinking, okay, it's just the golden rule. Then she read a quote from 1 Peter 3:14 that caught my attention. "But even if you do suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled." That got me thinking about what Daddy had said to me in the car. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I was pretty sure Peter would say being friends with Liz was right. Daddy was the one who was wrong to be afraid. Before I could decide on how I felt about that, I noticed little Jimmy was sitting across the circle, staring at me. I hadn't spoken to him since I gave him the peach pit. And well, actually, I hadn't spoken to him since then either. I had a vague recollection of seeing him at Sunday school once or twice before, but he wasn't a regular like me. He was short, of course, and I'd always thought he was as bland as a glass of apple juice. His eyes seemed too big for his face, like a child's, and his cheeks were chubby, though the rest of him was skinny as a pole. I noticed he had a notebook clutched in one hand. Little Jimmy gave a small wave and smiled at me. I blushed. Did he like me? When class was over, I let the others file out first so I wouldn't run into little Jimmy. By the time he was gone, my mother was at the door. "Miss Nisbet," Miss Winthrop said. "It's so good to see you." "Hello, Miss Winthrop," said Mother. "I do hope Marley was well behaved in class." "Oh, she's a doll as always." Miss Winthrop was the only person who ever described me as a doll, and I didn't talk in class. How much trouble did Mother think I could get into? "I've been hoping to run into you," said Miss Winthrop. "Oh, really?" asked Mother. "Why?" "Some women and I have started a little group, a committee, actually, and we were wondering if we could convince you to join." Mother's face brightened. "I'm always happy to do some volunteer work. And with things at school the way they are, well, let's just say I have plenty of time on my hands." "Funny you mentioned the school," said Miss Winthrop. "That's what our group is about. We're calling it the Women's Emergency Committee to open our schools, the WEC for short. Now, I know you are a teacher, so I was hoping you would join. Only costs $1. We'll put your name on our mailing list and you'll be informed of all our events. So, what do you say? Miss Winthrop finished breathlessly. Will you join? Mother was red as she struggled to find the words. Miss Winthrop, I'm honored, but of course, I want the schools to reopen. However, I'm not really sure Negroes should be going to our schools. No need to worry about that, Miss Winthrop continued smoothly. The WEC isn't for integration or segregation, but for education. Still, said Mother, looking at the ground, I'm afraid the answer is no. Oh, all the fizz went out of Miss Winthrop. I hated Mother in that moment. She knew how important it was for me to have Judy come home. I thought it was important to her too. More important than who went to school where. After a moment, Miss Winthrop's enthusiasm bubbled back up. Well, if you ever change your mind, please let me know. Mother glanced over at me. I pretended to be studying a Bible. No reason to let her know I'd been listening. Just hope she didn't notice it was upside down. I'll meet you on the front steps, Marley, she said and walked out. As soon as Mother was gone, I felt for the dollar in my pocket. Might as well add another name to my talking list. I looked over at Miss Winthrop and counted 2, 3, 5, 7 and said, I want to join. It wasn't as hard as I expected. Miss Winthrop looked delighted, at least until she remembered my mother had just refused. Are you sure your mother won't mind? But even if you do suffer for righteousness' sake, I said, you will be blessed. Thank you, Marley, said Miss Winthrop as she took my money. You really are a doll. Chapter 21, Three Good Things. On Thursday, I was sitting in Mr. Harding's classroom, munching on my pimento cheese sandwich, when he came over and threw a thick book down on my desk. Look at the cover, he said. I flipped the book over. Algebra 1 was written across in front in large letters. Here's the deal, said Mr. Harding. His face was serious, but his eyes were shining. You get to eat lunch in my classroom. In exchange, you have to spend 15 minutes every day doing math with me. Algebra was a high school math course. I was only in 7th grade. He read my mind. Come on, Marley, you know 7th grade math is way too easy for you. That was true, and even though Judy talked about algebra like it was a horrible torture device, David was convinced I'd love it. Do you need to hear the speech I prepared about how we need girls like you to save us from the Soviets? That's what my brother had said. All those American satellites aren't going to invent themselves. Mr. Harding grinned at me, just like David did. Maybe I could talk. Mr. Harding was already on my list. Just 15 minutes a day, and it was only about math. Okay, I said. Really? Asked Mr. Harding. I nodded. Mr. Harding winked at me and opened the book. On Friday, I got some mail. 2 pieces, actually. The first was a postcard from Judy. It said, Pine Bluff welcomes you on one side. The other side was written a short notice, a note. Dear little sis, I hate it here. Granny burned the pot roast, the toast, and the scrambled eggs. The kids at school are mean. Please send a new pair of hose without holes. Lots of love, Judy. Mother also got a letter from Judy. Daddy kept trying to peek over her shoulder, but she kept turning away. What does yours say? Daddy asked me. I didn't get one. I guess Judy was still mad at him for sending her to Pine Bluff. Granny's a bad cook, I said, and she needs some new underwear. Daddy laughed. It wasn't much of a letter. I wasn't much of a letter writer, but I'd have her. Sorry. I wasn't much of a letter. Guys, I'm literally reading in my mask, so it's kind of hard to enunciate. Anyways, I wasn't much of a letter writer, but I'd have to send her a note in return. The other piece of mail was a flyer from the Women's Emergency Committee to open our schools. What's this? Asked Daddy. Miss Winthrop is a member, I explained. She invited me to join. The flyer said Brotherhood Week at the top. And there were 4 little buildings drawn with the names of 4 closed high schools on them. Central, Horace Mann, Hall, and Tech. There was a quote beneath it that read, The world is now too dangerous for anything but the truth, too small for anything but brotherhood. The post office box of the WEC was listed at the bottom. Nice, said Daddy, and he patted me on the back. Finally, it was Saturday and I could call Liz. I waited until Mother and Daddy were busy in the backyard and then snuck into the kitchen to use the phone. I don't like using the phone. In real life, I can actually tell if I say the wrong thing. Someone might roll their eyes or look away, but on the phone, I don't have those clues. To make things even worse, we have a party line, which means we share one phone line with two of our neighbors. We each have our own ring. Ours is a short one. Ours is one short and one long. But if someone wants to be nosy, they can just pick up the receiver and listen right in. And it seemed like every time I tried to place a call, Mr. Harrelson chose the exact time to call his mother. So to deal with all those variables, I'd written out everything I was going to say on note cards. I laid them all out in front of me in short rows, took a deep breath, pictured the lions at the zoo, and dialed Liz's number. The woman answered on the fourth ring. Hello? Hello, I read. May I please speak to Elizabeth Fullerton? Who's calling? She sounded suspicious. I had to look down at my notes to remember the name we picked out from school. Mary, I said, a friend from school. The woman grumbled something under her breath. Then I heard her yell, Elizabeth, you have a phone call. A moment later, I heard Liz pick up the phone. Hello? She said. Hi, I read. It's me. Can you meet me at the zoo in 20 minutes? No. No? You're supposed to say yes. I'm taking my little brother to the movies, Liz continued. I frantically searched through my cards for a response. Hello? Are you still there? Liz asked. I thought we were going to do something today, I mumbled finally. I said I'd try. My mother needs me to watch my brother and told me to take him to the Wizard of Oz, she said. I'd invite you to come too, but we're going to the gem, she said. The Negro movie theater? I looked at the only card I had left. Great. See you there. Didn't seem quite appropriate. I need to help my mother clean the bathroom anyway. Maybe another time, she said brightly. Yes, I said, and hung up the phone, disappointed. As I scrubbed the toilet, I started thinking, why hadn't I said, great, see you there? I knew the gem was over on West Ninth Street. If I could go to a Negro church, why not a Negro movie theater? I turned the idea over and over in my mind, like a lemon drop on my tongue. I imagined being the only white girl in a room full of Negroes and shivered. It was a little scary. But Liz had been the only colored girl in the whole school full of white kids. Negroes might not be welcome at the white theater, but I didn't think there was a rule against whites going to the Negro theater. If she could do it, so could I.